Today we're doing another Boy Scout Merit Badge because, well, I'm just going to do it so I don't have to actually do anything during the meeting. This one is going to be on YouTube, I know for sure, because I have no other way of sharing it with people. And this is going to be the Animation Merit Badge. So this is a pretty short merit badge. It's got like 5 main requirements, or classes of requirements. They're all fairly easy and quick, which is why I'm doing it. And let's get on with requirement number 1. The first requirement is general knowledge. It has 2 parts. The first part is, in your own words, describe to your counselor what animation is. Animation is basically moving or manipulating pictures to make it appear as a moving image. But of course, those were my words, so you have to come up with something else. So the second requirement is discuss with your counselor a brief history of animation. So animation started a long time before the development of cinematography, which is basically the art of motion picture photography, filming, and stuff like that. As far as I can find by Wikipedia, the first real animation, why does my voice sound like this? Anyway, the first real animation techniques were shadow play and the magic lantern. Shadow play is basically, shadow puppets where you make your hands and make stuff look like stuff with a flashlight. It was this, but with paper. And the magic lantern, which you've seen those old movies where they have like a little lens which you put in front of the camera and it would shine a light through it and depict it like on a sheet or something. That's what magic lantern is. The first actual recorded with a camera animation is LAPOSTOL. I really suck at pronouncing stuff. It's lost. I don't think there are any copies of it remaining, but it was a cutout animation, which is where you cut out pieces of paper and make them do stuff, like a cutout of a person, and then you move the limbs to make it like walk across something. You get what I'm saying, hopefully, because if you don't, I'm not going to explain it. That came out in like 1917. The first synchronized sound film was 1924, and the characters didn't actually like speak or their mouths didn't move, but there was sound. It was like Oh Mabel, I think is what it's called. The first film filmed in 2-color Technicolor, no clue what that means, you're gonna have to look it up, I'm just reading off Wikipedia, was The King of Jazz. Then in 1931, there was a feature-length sound film. I can't pronounce this one either. It's an animated film, and it's usually considered the first film with sound because it was actually a film. And it was on a disc, or a sound-on-disc synchronized system. In 1951 were the first animated 3D films. In 1957, the first animated TV series broadcast in color. It was Colonial Bleep. In 1990, the first film made with no camera. It was using Disney's computer animation production system. So it was all computerized, not actually drawn out on paper, and no camera used. And that's it. Sorry if the sound for this is really crappy, but I'm not going to redo it because it took a long time to make, even though it's actually only like 2 minutes and 20 seconds of sound. Now, the next requirement is requirement 2, principles of animation. Choose 5 of the following 12 principles of animation and discuss how each one of them makes an animation appear more believable. The 12 principles of animation are squash and stretch, anticipation, stagging, straightening action, and pose to pose, follow through and overlapping action, slow in and slow out, arcs, secondary action, timing, exaggeration, solid drawing, and appeal. So the first of the 12 principles of animation, and probably the most important one in my opinion, is called squash and stretch. This should be used no matter what you do, but It's most commonly used, or at least I most commonly use it, when I'm making something jump. When it takes off from the jump, it should stretch out a little bit, and when it lands, it should squash a little bit. Usually, the more it squashes or the more it stretches, the more cartoony it looks. It can also be used to give an idea of what the object is made out of. For example, if it's a slime, it would squash a bunch. But if it's a rock, it wouldn't squash at all. The next one is anticipation, which is basically leading the eye. People realize that audiences could not easily follow the animation unless there's a planned series of events leading the eye. So you can't just have something happen on one side of the screen and then the next thing happen on the other. You have to make sure that they're always looking at where you want them to. Otherwise, you just can't follow what's going on. So the next one is stagging. Its purpose is to direct the audience's attention and make it clear what's of greatest importance in the scene. It's basically making sure you're focusing on the right thing, kind of like anticipation. Is basically keeping people focused on what is relevant and avoiding unnecessary detail. You can do this in many ways, using light, where the characters are positioned. But yeah, I'm not going to go into very much detail on this because I have a lot more to do. Anyway, on to the next one. Now, the next principle is straight ahead action and pose to pose. There are two different approaches to drawing. Straight ahead action scenes are animated frame by frame from the beginning to the end, while pose to pose involves starting with a few keyframe drawings and then filling in between them later on. Straight ahead creates a more fluid and dynamic illusion of movement, is better for producing realistic action sequences. On the other hand, it's hard to maintain exact proportion and convincing poses along the way. Pose to pose works better for like emotional scenes where the surroundings are of greater importance and you need to know it needs to be less chaotic, basically. Usually a combination of the two techniques are used. So the next one is follow through and overlapping action. There are two closely related techniques which help render movement more realistic. It gives the impression that the character follows the law of physics, including the principles of inertia. Follow through means loosely tied parts of the body should continue moving after the character stops, and should keep moving beyond the point where the character stops, only to be subsequently pulled back towards the center of mass. Like if someone's really fat, their stomach keeps going a teeny bit further than the rest of their body, and then pulls back. Now, overlapping action is the tendency for parts of the body to move at different rates. The arm will move at a different timing than the head, so not everything starts and ends at the same time, basically. It can be very useful for making something look realistic. I use it quite a bit in animating characters for the games I make. The next one is slow in and slow out. So, objects in the real world need time to accelerate and slow down. So, you should draw more pictures near the beginning and the end of an action, creating a slow in and slow out effect in order to achieve more realistic movement. You should also draw less in the middle to make it look faster in the middle. The next principle is arcs. Most natural actions tend to follow an arch trajectory. Therefore, to make your animation look realistic, you should make arcs in your animation. This technique can be applied to a moving limb by rotating a joint, or a thrown object by making it arch a little bit. Now, when you make something mechanical, it typically moves in straight lines, so you just shouldn't worry about this. As an object's speed increases, you should make the arc longer and less sharp. Whereas when something's slower, it can turn in a shorter distance. Like when you're driving, you can't make a U-turn going 60 miles an hour. But when you're going 20, you can. And traditionally, animators tend to draw arcs lightly on the paper for reference and then erase before they actually finished it. Now the next one is secondary action. This one I should use a lot more than I do. Adding secondary actions to the main actions gives the scene a lot more life and can make it look a lot more realistic. A person walking can swing their arms or keep them in their pockets at the same time. And you could maybe make their chest rise and fall as they're walking, like they're breathing. Or basically just make it so they're doing multiple things overlapping at different times. So they don't all start and end at the same time. I think I said this somewhere earlier on in here. It makes it look a lot more realistic. Next is timing. Timing refers to the number of drawings or frames for a given action, which translates into how fast the action will appear on film. On a physical level, correct timing makes the object appear to obey the law of physics. For instance, an object with lighter weight reacts to a push faster than a heavier one, which means that there will be less frames for a lightweight object and more for a heavier one. It also says that timing is critical for establishing a character's mood, emotion, and reaction. It can also be used as a device to communicate aspects of the character's personality. I have no clue how to do that, or if that works, but someone on the internet says it, so it must be true. Exaggeration is especially useful for animation. An animation that looks perfectly realistic can look very static and dull. The level of exaggeration depends on whether one seeks realism or a certain style. Exaggeration you usually remain true to reality, but prevent it in a more extreme form. Exaggeration can also involve supernatural, surreal alterations to the physical features of a character or elements of the storyline itself. Like, for example, have you ever seen those old movies where, like, whatever the Coyote and the Roadrunner, you know how his eyes always pop out of his head? Like that. But it's also important to employ a certain level of restraint when using exaggeration. If a scene has several elements, there should be a balance between those elements, and a balance in between how those elements are exaggerated in relation to each other, because otherwise it can be very confusing and overwhelming to a viewer. Next we have solid drawing. The principle of solid drawing means taking into account forms in three-dimensional space and giving them volume or weight. The animator needs to be a skilled artist and understand the basics of three-dimensional shapes, autonomy, weight, balance, light, and shadow, etc. Some people say that one thing in particular to not do is creating twins, characters whose left and right sides are mirrors of each other. They look lifeless, apparently. But it's a lot easier to do, so I highly suggest it. The last one is appeal. Appeal in cartoon characters corresponds to what would be called charisma for an actor or whatever. A character who is appealing is not necessarily sympathetic. Villains or monsters can also be appealing. Its important thing is that the viewer feels the character is real and interesting. There's several tricks for making the character connect better with the audience, but I'm not going to go over these because I don't know any of them. Anyway, let's move on to the next requirement. I'm done with this. Next thing is requirement 3. It requires you, with your counselor's approval, choose 2 animation techniques and do the following for each. A. Plan your animation using thumbnails, sketches, and or layout drawings. B. Create an animation. C. Share your animation with your counselor and explain how you created each one and discuss any improvements that could be made. Thumbnail sketch is just a quick sketch of what's going to happen in the animation, and a layout drawing is a quick sketch of the layout or scene or whatever that the animation will be taking place in. I think. I'm not quite sure. There are many different techniques of animation, but I'm only covering 2 main sets of them because I'm lazy. Stop motion animation are created by physically manipulating real-world objects and photographing them 1 frame of film at a time to create the illusion of movement. Now there's puppet animation, which uses puppet figures. There's clay animation, whatever it is, which uses clay figures. But you can also use your Legos to do this if you would like. I mean, this is probably the easiest one to do. Next is computer animation or digital animation. There are only two types in this, which is 2D and 3D. Now, both of these are pretty self-explanatory. 2D are done with 2D objects or drawings, and 3D animation is where the animator manipulates a digitally modeled object to make the animation. Now, once you've made your animation and showed it to your counselor, explained how you created each one, and discussed any improvements that could be made, you're on to requirement 4, animation in our world. Now, this has two requirements inside of it: tour an animation studio or business where animation is used, either in person, via video, or the internet. Share what you learned and discuss it with your counselor. And the next one is discuss with your counselor how animation might be used in the future to make your life more enjoyable and productive. So, the tour and animation studio or business where animation is used, just Google it. I'm sure you can find a lot of videos, and I'm not going to do that for you because I'm lazy. I want to go to bed. And the next requirement, which is discuss with your counselor how animation might be used in the future to make your life more enjoyable and productive, that one I'm also going to leave up to you. So you'll have to do a little research on these. And on to requirement number 5. Number 5 is careers. Learn about 3 career opportunities in animation. Pick one and find out about the education, training, and experience required for this profession. Discuss your findings with your counselor and explain to your counselor why this profession might be of interest to you. There are a lot of jobs in animation: art director, 3D modeler, stop motion animator, texture artist. There are a lot of them, and I'm sure you could find way more if you look them up. And all you gotta do is find the education needed, training, and experience required for this job, and you have the animation merit badge.